Christopher Sweat, GrayStak. I'm sitting here in Lincoln Square with Austin Berg, and it's been a little while.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to talk to you today, actually. I had to bring note cards. And this time I didn't write on the back of them. Yeah, I mean, this is
classic political mistake.
Yeah. People are screenshotting it. Yeah. Some of your roles right now, you're the executive director at the Chicago Policy Center, co-founder of Iron Light. You've got your Substack platform, The Last Ward, which has over 158,000 subscribers. You're a co-author of the book, The New Chicago.
New Chicago Way.
The New Chicago Way. You're in the media a lot talking about Chicago politics at the local, regional, and national level. And not just Chicago politics, really, right? Just Illinois and then just our government.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I kind of think of your thesis, or like a broad synthesis of your thesis, as Chicago's dysfunction is structural, not necessarily about one mayor or one individual. You also wrote, you also say Chicago's system is the last strongman political system. Does that sound right?
I don't know if it's the last. I would say we still have, among the big cities, we have the most in terms of vestiges of like strongman, almost caudillo sort of system among big cities. Yeah.
Okay, and some of this would be like the fact we don't have a city charter. We have a weak council that often gets appointed by the mayor. No elected CFO or city attorney. No vote sign off on debt or taxes. So just giving everyone like some broader context on your perspective. And then in the national frame, I would kind of say, tell me if you agree, we could describe you as like Chicago as a case, you kind of position as a cautionary tale. Mm-hmm. Okay. New York is one of the control groups that you often kind of do comparatives to for a different municipal system that has some features Chicago could benefit from. Mm-hmm. And then you think of abundance as the alternative.
I don't know if I would say, but I like some of the abundance ideas.
Okay.
And I think abundance is sort of a catch-all term for sustainable growth of a city.
Okay.
So that's appealing to me as someone who cares about Chicago.
Sure.
So yeah, we can talk about that.
Okay, we'll get into it. So this will be my first cold open on an interview. Great. Won't be that exciting though. Actually, it will be really exciting because I'm excited to talk with you about this. So, okay, so I'll just put it like this. Chicago runs on one job. The mayor holds more unchecked power than any big city executive in the country, and that design shapes the pensions, taxes, curfew fights, and the next election. You, Austin Berg, have spent a decade making that case, co-authoring some of the books and works that we have talked about with a very large audience, again, local, regional, and at times a national audience. When the teachers union budget leaked, it landed with you, and you wrote a pretty groundbreaking piece on that. And then also there was a Springfield $11 billion pension sweetener that you wrote some of the best critical analysis on. You called it the worst deal since parking meters. Okay. So we'll just jump into the first question. So if governance structure matters more than ideology, do you think it matters who wins in 2027 in Chicago's mayor race, or is it a field competing to run a broken machine?
Wow. So you've been in Chicago long enough to know that almost every social interaction, even in like a casual sense, many times, whether it's you're at a bar or you're at someone's house for dinner or you're just out in the community talking to people, a very common sort of end of the conversation is, so like, who you got?
Yeah,
who's going to be
for
mayor?
Sure, though.
Is Brandon going to run for mayor? Is he not? What do you look? People are looking at prediction markets now too, of like who's going to be the next person. Oh, you see this guy raised all this money. Oh, they're running for 2 offices. Blah blah blah.
Yep.
And this is like a pathology. I think. And it is, the mayor's race is the lens through which Chicagoans understand the city politics more than anything else.
Sure.
So I've called this a syndrome called waiting for Superman.
Okay.
And the city is sort of, many people in the city look to one person, the mayor, to kind of be our salvation from whatever challenges the city is experiencing. And I think it's totally understandable why that's the case, because we come from this strong mayor system and they do have so much influence over the day-to-day operations of the city.
Sure.
And I would say it's a necessary condition to have good leadership, but it's not a sufficient condition to have a growing, thriving city. It's not a sufficient condition to have the most accountable, effective, transparent big city government in America. Currently, we're like a stock where if a key part of the leadership changes, it's just so volatile, right?
Sure.
And every mayor's election seems like this existential thing for the city. Whereas a really strong business, it doesn't matter who necessarily is at the top. They're stewards of a project that is bigger than just one person.
Sure.
And it's resilient. So moving Chicago culturally toward that, I think, is really important. So to answer your question, it matters who the mayor is, but they're not going to be the savior of the city. Mm. And I would be conscious and a little skeptical of people who promise that they can be that.
Okay. And do you think like any mayor has the potential of bringing good governance, or do they make it easier to appeal to some of those governance interests?
Yeah, I think so. I often say, and this is paraphrasing a famous diplomat, public office does not create intellectual capital, it consumes intellectual capital.
Okay.
And a lot of people running for mayor don't start with that intellectual capital. This is a lot of wonky stuff, how the city is governed beyond just like the headlines of
Meaning when they go to
safety.
run, they don't really actually understand the management.
Oftentimes, yeah, oftentimes. So part of our role at the Chicago Policy Center is to inform candidates of all across the ideological spectrum of what really the options are. Because it's not like a national race, for U.S. Senate or for Congress, where you have a list of 4 kind of things that is the party line, where
Sure.
you can just go in and say it was Chicago. It's not that. It's not so simple.
Yeah.
And I think really the candidates that stand out are going to be the people who talk about not just what it looks like when we have a mayor who is maybe not Brandon Johnson. It's what does Chicago look like on our 200th birthday in 10 years, in 2037? What things can I do as mayor today to structurally strengthen the city so that it's stronger no matter who is the mayor?
Sure.
That's what I'm kind of looking for.
Okay. I'll go to my next question, which again, writing these down is like so formal, but
I like it.
you have a big body of work, so I want to make sure we touch on
Thanks.
important topics. Okay, so your book said pensions would move off the defined budget?
Defined benefit?
Defined benefit, I apologize. And the 2025 sweetener went the other way of that prediction. Do you think you were wrong, or were you just early?
So we didn't predict that it would change, but I think it's important that we move the system of retirement for what's called defined benefit, which is a political promise of here's what your benefit is going to be.
Okay.
That's a defined benefit pension when you retire.
Okay.
And it's day one in Illinois. It's whatever you're promised day one of your employment. As you start employment, it's just that is it forever. And moving it more to a retirement account that the worker actually owns, which is called defined contribution. Which most people watching, if you have a retirement plan, it's defined contribution. You put in some to the pot, and your employer puts some into the pot, and you control that.
Sure.
And it's portable from job to job. Defined benefit is really sort of old way of doing retirement benefits that is really, really rare. But we still have it in the public sector, in the city.
And is this across our whole pension system?
Yes.
It's our whole pension system.
Almost everybody.
Defined benefit.
Yes.
Or most of it.
Almost all of it. There is a choice within state. If you're a state university employee and you're going into employment, you can choose, would I like a defined contribution plan or a defined benefit plan? And I think that's great, giving people those options. But that's a pretty narrow choice. There's a lot more public sector workers than just are at state universities. So the reason the defined benefit pension plan in Illinois is so fraught is that Springfield, with the snap of its fingers, can add billions of dollars in liabilities to a city like Chicago without Chicago ever getting a voice. Because the rules, those defined benefit rules, what is the dollar amount of your pension? Chicago has to pay that, but it's decided by the state. And what we saw with this sweetener that passed in Springfield last year is it added $11 billion in liabilities to the city of Chicago that we're going to have to pay. And in terms of an annual cost, we're looking at immediately like $30 to $50 million a year. For context, folks may have heard about summer jobs program in Chicago. The mayor talks about that a lot. Mayor Johnson talks about it a lot. It predates him, but that's been a big initiative of his, and one I actually agree with. And the evidence on that program is quite good. This pension cost, just this new cost, would pay for an entirely new program of that size for city. You could double the amount of that program with the size of this new pension benefit. That's one of the reasons that the defined benefit pension is such a dangerous tool to have in the hands of political actors in Illinois, and we would prefer seeing it transition.
And so literally the state basically unilaterally assigned that liability to the city of Chicago. You said $11 billion?
$11 billion unfunded liability. And that's...
and I don't think most residents know?
No, I mean, it was passed... It was a couple of days after session until it was clear that had even happened.
And was it in the...
it was in the budget. Yeah,
it was in the
budget process in 2025.
How much of this do you think comes back to the kind of friction between the governor, J.B. Pritzker, and the mayor, Brandon Johnson?
I think it comes...
Or would the state have muscled us anyway?
Well, great question. I think in part it is a consequence of the mayor's lack of political capital in Springfield.
Okay.
We did see we were the first to publish this, the Chicago CFO at the time, Jill Jaworski, did send a letter after this had already gone through the legislative process pretty far that said, she literally used the word insolvent. This would make the pensions insolvent. And this is very bad for the city, and we would encourage you to not do this. But the mayor was not, even in public, not saying to stop doing this. So I think the leadership of the city really did matter in that moment because there are no guardrails on passing this kind of thing in Springfield. They were able to add this massive liability very, very quickly. And
the idea, just for on a basic level, is that the state wanted to increase the amount of money in the pension, and they literally just taxed us for it. And the tax burden landed heavily on Chicago.
Even worse, they just made the promise. They didn't make the tax. So it's not funded. Whoa. We don't. It's basically, here's a massive new thing you have to pay for. Yeah. You figure out how to.
You fund it. So Chicago needs to fund it.
Right. Wow. And that's likely going to come from it'll come from cutting existing programs and funding it, new taxes, or new debt. That's the only way to pay for it.
Wow. Fascinating. Okay, so then this brings me to another good question. And you know a lot more about this than me, obviously, so maybe give us some context. Is it fair to call Chapter 9 your release valve?
So currently, Chicago is the only big city among the top 15 in America that cannot, when they have liabilities like this, go to a bankruptcy judge and say, I need debt relief. Help me renegotiate this. That's not a tool that we have at our disposal in Chicago.
And this is what Chapter 9?
Chapter 9 bankruptcy is that.
Okay.
So you might be familiar with Detroit. It's the most prominent example of a city that went through Chapter 9 bankruptcy. That was over a decade ago. Yep. Detroit today has a better credit rating than the city of Chicago.
Whoa.
And so it can be very helpful for a city, but it's also extraordinarily painful and extreme.
Okay.
So Chapter 9 should be a very, very last resort. Mm-hmm. And what we need in Illinois is a framework for distressed cities, which we don't have. Governance is just by the seat of our pants, it seems like, especially in Springfield and especially in Chicago. And what a framework for distressed cities would do is say, here's an early warning system, almost like an extreme weather early warning system, where we're taking stock of what are the basic financials of every city in the state, that early warning system, then some kind of intervention where if you're way over your skis, like we're seeing some communities in the south suburbs like Harvey, where they have debts that really the city will not ever be able to pay, given its current tax base, and they've cut to the bone. How do you intervene earlier in that process to say the state come in, maybe a emergency financial oversight to be able to right the ship?
Okay.
And then as a last resort, being able to, an emergency manager being able to go to a bankruptcy judge and say, hey, this is the only way we think we're going to be able to get out of this.
Sure.
We don't have any of that framework in Illinois. So we're right at the end where it's just a crisis in places like Harvey. And could be the case in a city like Chicago, though our economic base is just so much bigger. Harvey really has trouble even collecting property tax revenue because there's their levy, because the amount of exodus has just been so extreme there. So I think having a framework for distressed cities is really important, not just Chapter 9. I should also say, if we get Chapter 9, if that authority exists, I'm not an advocate for jumping into that.
Sure.
You have to go through a process. But having the tool, that is very important for negotiations.
Okay.
Right now,
when the city needs to negotiate with creditors or potentially the federal government or entities that would structure a bailout.
Public sector unions, that's a key thing for bargaining there. And even if you think about something like the parking meter deal, where it's like, hey, we have no leverage in this right now. If Chapter 9's on the table, they might take a haircut from a judge. And so you can go to vendors like that and say, listen, we can either negotiate in good faith right now, or this can go to a judge and then it's out of our hands.
Right.
And you can do the same thing with public sector unions as well.
That's interesting. Okay. So, check this out now. Make the strongest economic case against the millionaire's tax. And then tell me where trust in Springfield, affects this case, or like how Chicago's trust in Springfield kind of plays out.
I'll start by saying, in general, a federal framework or even a state framework of progressive taxation such that there's a higher rate for people making higher incomes, in concept, makes sense from a tax policy standpoint because it's accounting for ability to pay. And I'm just saying that as in isolation, tax policy, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. And we definitely have a very progressive income tax structure at the federal level. And even in Illinois, we do have, in effect, a progressive income tax structure because there are tax credits for folks who are lower income where they're not paying the same income tax rate as someone who's making a lot of money. This new proposal for a millionaire's tax is essentially, we're going to slap a 3% new income tax on all income over $1 million in the state of Illinois. The reason that we should be skeptical of this is because I believe that makes our biggest problem as a state even worse. Our biggest problem as a state is 3 words: people, people, people. Over the last decade, we have lost roughly 1 million people on that to other states. That's as if, I believe, the 7 or 8 largest cities in the state outside Chicago were just wiped off the map.
So from a tax perspective, I think if I remember correctly, this means that we have reduced the adjusted gross income in our state by $83 billion?
It's $8 billion.
$8 billion.
It's $8 billion a year that we're not getting in income in our state just due to that. So if you could just break even, that's way more money than any increased tax rate can get you. It's just keeping folks here on that. That's just even zero. So we also saw a state like, so what you worry about obviously is when you look at who are those people leaving, the group leaving the fastest out of those million is the highest income group measured by the IRS. For every 2 people that leave out of that income group, just 1 comes in. So that's the worst rate of any bracket. So adding a new tax burden specifically for that risks accelerating that exodus. That's less income tax base to pay for libraries, education, parks, right? Public safety. So we need a strong tax base. That would make it worse. And the case I use is Massachusetts is really the only state in the last 20 or 30 years to do this surcharge kind of approach. And we just got the data back on what the results were. And first of all, $4 billion left the state. The lion's share of that was from high income earners who left. And this was the most shocking thing. The entire pie of the income in Massachusetts shrunk. That is a recipe for disaster. If you have a shrinking total pie because of your tax policy, that means the tax policy is not
it's not working.
Right.
Unless you want to lose money and drive people out of your state.
And so I'm not asking people to shed a tear for like pinstripe suit, Rolex wearing, gold watch, like cartoon of a millionaire. But this is, again, it doesn't. I should note, it doesn't just affect people who are taking a salaried job that's making that much. A lot of these are pass-through businesses, so it's highly skilled tradespeople who are doing HVAC, plumbing, landscaping type businesses, where they're passing through that income. There's 22,000 small businesses in Illinois that would be hit by that. Those are the types of businesses that grow virtually all new jobs in Illinois, come from small businesses like that. So we risk not only income leaving the state, but job growth leaving the state too, which I don't think we can afford.
Wow. Okay.
That's the economic case. Yeah.
Yeah. And, okay, I don't know if this is the right phrase for this, but we're going to call it structural reform. Is that okay? So is structural reform a neutral good government frame, or does it carry a project on unions and pensions?
Oh, interesting. Okay. So when I talk about structural reform, at least in our book, The New Chicago Way, what do we mean by that? Well, the basic thesis of the book is Chicago is an outlier on a few different metrics. Whether you look at the amount of debt, which we just talked about, public safety compared to other big cities, we're still an outlier on. Education outcomes relative to our spending, we're still an outlier on. Why is that? It's due to poor decisions made over decades. And the source of many of those poor decisions are not simply the person in the office, but it is the structure that allowed those poor decisions to happen. With a better structure, we could have made better decisions. So what we did was look at the 15 other US cities, largest US cities as our peers, and said, what does their structure for decision-making look like across the relationship with the city council and the mayor, education, policing, even the convention center, like we talked about McCormick Place, all these things. And when I talk about structural reform, I talk about what lessons can we learn from the mistakes that not only Chicago's made, but those other big cities have made and solved for. So in a sense, I guess that's ideological in the sense that like everything's ideological. You're looking to what other big cities for solutions, but I don't think it like fits neatly on like political partisanship or something like that.
Yeah. Also, I don't think you're not anti-pension.
No, I mean,
it's just like the pension needs to be sustainable. It sits in like a real structure economically.
It's very much so. And the decisions that get made on pensions reverberate for decades.
And we have a quite extraordinary pension burden relative to pure.
Yeah, we have, I mean, there's nowhere else like Illinois and Chicago in terms of our pension debt per person. So the structure is such that it's very easy to make the promises and there's no requirement to pay for them. So in that structure, that's bad for retirees, that's bad for taxpayers, and it's also bad for people who rely on government services because there's less money for services and there's more money for this huge debt. Yeah.
Okay. And some people I've talked to in different parts of the community have like expressed they feel like even the management or oversight of pensions is in question at times. I don't know if you...
I do think there's probably this is not going to solve our pension problems, but professional management of investments is a baseline thing that you have to do with pensions. You don't want to be, I mean, we've seen the cartoonish corruption decades ago of like the Teamsters, like whatever, or, we bought a casino in Vegas with the pension money, or we bought, these really risky things. So professional management of those really large, those are some of the biggest investors in the markets, period, are major public sector pensions. So professional management, definitely plenty of room for improvement, I think, for pension systems in Illinois. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Madigan. Okay, so we'll say he's gone, but we know that his conviction came through in April of this year, I believe.
This is last year, I think. Or actually, good point. In any event, he's in federal prison currently.
Okay. You've said that like his speakership powers are still intact. Could you like expand on that? And then if you like of your kind of broad reform list, what would you prioritize with the most urgency?
In terms of the Illinois House, I think a really low-hanging fruit reform that any common sense person in Illinois would think is a good idea is that we should have a ban on conflicts of interest.
Okay.
We operate on the honor system in terms of conflicts of interest when state lawmakers are voting on things.
Okay.
And that's a vestige of just Madigan era governance.
Does it mean they just disclose if they want?
Exactly.
There's no like, we just hope you disclose,
Exactly.
but if you don't, we can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And even the legislative
Is this for the
inspector
whole
general.
General Assembly?
Yes, that's for the House and the Senate. So I think that's very, very low hanging.
What are we doing here then? No.
The salary is, I mean, this has changed. I was going to say their salary is quite low, but you can make a lot if you don't have to disclose conflicts of interest. But now their salary is six figures for what is, in name at least, a part-time job in Springfield. So.
And is this because the session is closed between June and November?
Right. It's not a Chicago City Council, as you know, they meet as a full council every single month throughout the year. Springfield meets for a few weeks in the spring and a few weeks in the fall.
Is that normal in state legislative bodies?
It depends. Some legislative bodies meet only every 2 years.
Oh, wow.
So I think I would say we're kind of average.
Average.
How much we're meeting.
Okay. But from a disclosure perspective, is this kind of what got Madigan caught up? Just for people that didn't see the buildup of his prosecution and everything.
That is the type of, he would always say when asked about, he ran, for example, a property tax appeals firm. So you could hire Madigan's law firm if you wanted to appeal your property taxes when you're a big building.
While he's in office?
Yes.
Whoa, not a conflict of interest?
So presents
the book on conflict of interest.
Exactly. I mean, it's like a classic case of, even if it was all above board, simply the appearance reduces trust in government.
Oh, I'll help you with your taxes. Come in the side door to my legal practice.
Right.
There's a fee here too, by the way.
And he was on being secretly recorded in meetings that were somewhat like that. And that was part of the federal investigation into him. And even if you were to say, okay, all of that was above board, simply the appearance is a problem. And when asked about that, he would always say, no, I disclose, I disclose every relevant conflict of interest. But if there's no teeth behind it, I mean, that really reduces trust in government. So,
okay, I see.
It's a very common sense thing, would do a lot for trust in Springfield. And again, this is not going to change the culture there overnight, but I think it's a very basic thing you could do.
Okay. Okay, here's a broader governance question on the Illinois Investment Policy Board. Okay. So applied across the board, does your fiduciary principle cut against the exclusion list? Okay, and think of the exclusion list as Iran, Israel boycott, Russia, shelter. It's basically making investments in publicly traded companies that house migrants, immigrants per se, and other like federal immigration entities or publicly traded companies are on the exclusion list. Mm-hmm. So like, let me just zoom out a little bit. So as we're talking about governance, pensions, public finance, I guess you could say, one thing that I was kind of looking at is like, okay, there are a lot of different rules and structures and things that I think kind of like cut against the grain of free market principles. A lot of the exclusion list is already accounted for in OFAC and at the federal level. So do you think the way that you think about like free markets and governance would say, what's the point of an exclusion list? Or do you have a thought?
Good question. It's not an issue I've worked on a lot, but I'll just say like a couple of top line thoughts on that. I do think it's totally within the purview of a state. If you're saying we have this large pool of money, how do we invest it? You can make decisions about the values you want to use in investing that. Same thing this was a huge debate. I remember when I was in college around college endowments. How should those be invested? And that's a big source of campus protest, I think, too, is how does the college invest this endowment? And I think you can make values-based decisions on how you want to invest. What I don't like is that when people think that there's not trade-offs to that.
Okay.
And if I'm personally responsible for managing the money of Illinois teachers' pension funds, and I need this money to exist, or else someone's not getting their retirement check, or we're going to hike taxes on people who have fixed incomes, or we're going to put debt on the backs of our children and grandchildren. My operating principle, if it was personally me, would be you have to maximize the returns. Yeah. And that is the single thing you should be focused on. Everything else is going to be, if you open it up, it's a Pandora's box in terms of political investment decisions that by necessity are going to reduce returns. Okay. And where I get we saw this actually with the Chicago city treasurer. She said she's not going to invest in U.S. treasuries.
The Chicago city treasurer said that?
Yes, this was Melissa Conyers-Ervin.
Oh, wow.
And when pressed on that, people are saying, this is the safest, most liquid asset on Earth.
And it's also a global benchmark.
Yes.
So if you're going to counter the benchmark, you need a good benchmark to counter it.
Right. What do you replace it with? So when asked about this, saying, hey, won't this, by necessity, given this is like the safest, most liquid asset on the planet, that's going to hurt our financial performance? Yeah. And her response was essentially, no, there's other things we could invest in.
Like what?
Right.
Well, why would you even exclude? China doesn't exclude the U.S. Treasury.
Right. So it was, I think in general, it's better to have a principle that you can make value-based decisions in terms of your operating budget, what programs you're investing in, things like that. But when it comes to, we need this money available to pay for people's retirement or fund government 30 years from now, you should operate on maximizing your returns and not political considerations.
Okay, and I'll just add to this. I've talked to folks that like maybe have what are they, pensioners? If they draw on a pension. Mm-hmm. So police and fire, some of the teachers' pensions, some of the more state pensions. Mm-hmm. And then I'm looking at all types of vehicles in public equity, including hedge funds and so forth. So for a lot of people, they don't realize so there's a benchmark performance, which is usually benchmark against, for some investments, the U.S. Treasury, for others, S&P 500.
This is a big difference between what I always talk about with defined benefit pensions is your retirement is dependent on a political process, which is outside your control. Mostly, they're going to be making decisions on. You may have a pension board that's we're not doing U.S. Treasuries. That affects your retirement security. Whoa. Whereas defined contribution, that is your money. You can decide what you do with it.
Oh, I see. That's a benefit. Okay, hold on. We'll snap back to that. Because the point here is that benchmark performance is not considered sustainable performance in public equity. Mm-hmm. You need to get alpha. Mm-hmm. Alpha is the return above the benchmark. Benchmark is you're lazy and you just were in a couple indexes and some managed funds, and now you're paying out the ass in fees. Because you have many different layers of fees that asset managers will charge these pension managers or whatever. So if you perform at benchmark, you're actually net below the benchmark because of all the fees. Right. And so alpha is the returns that are above the benchmark, which actually dictates if you're considered a great manager or not. Mm-hmm. And so I'm kind of in the same line with you. Get the alpha, because that's what's going to prevent us from the state trying to write $11 billion to try to get us to pay taxes or whatever on funding a deficit of
returns,
the pension plan.
Yeah, and all of those plans assume returns, right? So they assume 7% returns roughly a year. So anything below that, you're going to have to make up with tax hikes and new debt. Mm-hmm. And anything above that, I think you have to be extremely risk averse if you're playing with a public sector pension fund. Okay. So benchmark in my mind is okay. You obviously want to try to be doing better, but to just minimize risk there. But yeah, the returns are, it's almost a miracle. It's money you can create without having to hike taxes or borrow more. So we should take it seriously.
Okay, and then how this comes back to the defined is defined.
Defined benefit and defined contribution.
So are you saying that in defined contribution, there wouldn't be like a central manager, like say like the treasurer is the discretionary manager of the Illinois operating fund? Instead, or maybe that stays intact, but like Cook County.
Right, the pension investment board. Right, like there's a board. There's an elected board of Chicago teacher pensions, and the Chicago teachers vote them in. You wouldn't need that kind of a board if people manage their own retirements, and there might be like a preferred provider, like whatever Voya or whatever,
or a bucket of investments that are compliant.
Exactly.
Okay,
so
but they're not going to allocate this massive multi-billion-dollar portfolio. Which maybe reduces friction.
Sure.
Gives people...
they can invest in their value. If they want to say, hey, listen, I don't want my retirement to come from this type of company or this country or whatever, you can make that personal choice. Today, you have to rely on some board to make that choice.
And the boards, like you said, that's a complex political process. Like the everyday person is not likely going to be the one that like intervenes there, I guess you could kind of say.
Yep.
Okay, that is interesting. Okay. I know we talked about abundance earlier, and then again, feel free to kind of like frame that if we think about abundance in Chicago. Mm-hmm. Here's the BAM question. Does any mayoral candidate carry an agenda that you think is worthwhile in this field that's shaping up right now?
Well,
like an abundance agenda, or kind of like, do you know what I mean?
So here's the political, every candidate challenging the incumbent will talk about why we need to grow Chicago.
Okay.
And the reason for that in political rhetoric is going to be, the only other options are to hike taxes or to cut programs. Mm-hmm. So whenever they're asked about the budget, people will simply say, well, we just got to grow.
Okay.
Because then you don't have to say how you're going to hike taxes or whether you're going to cut programs. I am all about that. Mm-hmm. I'm extremely pro growth for the city of Chicago. What are the specifics behind that? Mm-hmm. Of course, having a new mayor that seems more, that's talking in the media all the time about how we want to recruit businesses. That could be a form of growth, but is that really like a sustainable thing in the future? Probably not.
Sure.
So what are the actual policy provisions that you're putting forth on growth? You need to have certainty in budget and tax. Like that's a huge part of businesses wanting to grow in the city.
And this just means, for people listening, certainty is the idea that you can project forward a reasonable amount of time what the environment looks like. Then you'll make decisions today based on that knowledge.
It's very scary. Imagine plopping down $100 million investment on the city of Chicago when you have no idea what's
the forward look.
What does it look like from 10 years from now?
Okay.
So that's a huge part of growth. On housing, I think there's going to be a lot of candidates that take this more like yes in my backyard stance, which I think is great.
Okay.
And the incumbent has made some progress on that. I would say not enough, but making it easier to build housing in Chicago.
Okay.
is a great abundance platform item. So I think almost every candidate is going to have some form of that who's challenging the incumbent, and I think that's a good thing. People should ask for specifics though. What do you mean by growth?
Okay.
Mm-hmm. What levers will you actually pull, and how will they provide more certainty for businesses and investors going forward? Okay,
because I do notice some of the candidates, and there's always a wide array, and I'm sure it's going to be a long list by the time we start to get into the cycle for real. They don't have those details. It's like, I don't know if they just haven't been in the conversation.
I think though you'll see more as we get closer and closer. Like people will roll out what their specific platforms are.
Okay.
An interesting case study in this was close to the neighborhood we're in now. One of the biggest upsets this year in the Democratic primary was Drake Warren, who was a candidate who ran on a very sort of urbanist, more housing, more transit, very, I would say like an abundance platform. And he knocked off I think 15-year at least incumbent Cook County commissioner on that platform. Mm. So I think people saw that, and that's a real constituency. I think people understand that the city in order to be more affordable, needs more supply of these things. So that's a good sign, I think.
Yeah. Just thinking about the mayor's race a little bit now that I don't have my note cards, and we'll wrap up in a second, but you wrote some interesting things about like solutions for the kids that have been coming into different neighborhoods and causing tension in different ways. Everyone has a different perspective on what are we calling them?
Teen trends or
teen trends, teen takeovers. What were some of the things that you've gleaned from other cities that you thought could be a good solution?
Well, I think this is a classic example of us being so parochial and narrow-minded and inward-looking. We've been talking about this teen takeover, teen trend issue for over a year. I mean, when was that? There was a shooting outside Chicago Theater. That was like around Christmas time last year, and that was not the start of it. So it's been over a year, back and forth. There's this constant cycle of one of these events happens, someone gets hurt. City council says we need to do this. The mayor says no, we need to invest in more programming for youth. What you're saying is not the answer. And then it's just loggerheads, and then the cycle repeats itself over and over.
Yes, and we're in another loop.
Totally. And so one of our sort of like strategic imperatives in our work at Chicago Policy Center is to teach folks not just to look for a new mayor, but to pick their heads up and look to other big cities for solutions. And this was a great example. So Washington, D.C. has been a really big challenge for some neighborhoods in Washington, D.C. And Mayor Bowser and the city council were able to pass a package with targeted youth curfew zones. I think the essence is if you're under 18 in a group of more than X number of people after 8 o'clock, you're not allowed to be in that specific zone. There's a lot of steps that the council has to take before declaring that, or the mayor needs to take before declaring that a curfew zone. It also comes with services. Meaning
they have to prepare the community ahead of time and go through a process.
There's some advance notice. There's, you need to act quickly because obviously this intelligence is coming in quickly, but there is a clear process for doing that. And they tried it out last year. 0 teen trends happened. It then lapsed, and they started popping up again. And now they just went back, council and the mayor, and passed a longer term package for this. So it was, I encourage folks to look at the specifics of that. We don't need to get to every single sort of point that's in that proposal here. But I thought it was a good example of, rather than falling into this trap, which does seem to, in Chicago, fall along kind of conservative and liberal political lines, where it's like conservative, just like the parents, we got to find the parents, or we got to arrest the parents. And then more progressive folks being like, no, we need to invest in community services for youth. And you see DC, which is governed, by a pretty progressive coalition between the council and the mayor, and they came up with a solution, and it worked. So why? It's I think being more humble about our city and looking to other places for solutions can help a lot on teen trends and many other things.
Anything else on your mind, and also anything upcoming?
One thing on my mind, folks can look at this piece on The Last Ward, is on something we're going to see a lot of this summer in Chicago, which is public safety challenges. And the political muscle, similar to this waiting for Superman muscle, is we need to create another new body dedicated to this part of the violence. And in Chicago, one of our biggest public safety challenges is this proliferation of different bodies that are supposed to be responsible for public safety.
COPA, CCSPA, and like 10 others I can't even remember, with all these boards and elections.
There's at least 8 locally that you could say they have some oversight over police or public safety policy in the city.
Wow, 8?
8. And this makes it really, really difficult. If you've ever been in a boss where you have 8 jobs, it makes it very difficult to execute on any kind of long-term planning. And there was 2 huge, massively important reports that came out from a consulting group that was hired by the city to assess community policing and all sorts of elements of our public safety infrastructure in Chicago. It came out earlier this year. Very clear recommendations for how to improve professionalism in policing and implementing that.
Who put this out?
This is Matrix, I think, was the consulting group.
I think I saw it's pretty solid.
It's great. I mean, one report's over 700 pages, one's like 130 plus pages. The amount of work that went into this stuff, it's the biggest analysis of Chicago's public safety infrastructure since the report that produced the consent decree after the murder of Laquan McDonald.
Jeez, okay.
So this was a ton of work that went into this, and it's really amazing stuff. But you can't implement that if you have constantly every year new bodies popping up. And we saw the mayor do this again. He's not the first person to do it. And I would encourage folks again in lifting our heads up to look to the model that Los Angeles has, which is there is a police commission.
Okay.
There's 5 members of the commission appointed by the mayor, approved by the city council.
Okay.
All public safety infrastructure really reports to that police commission, the executive director that they hire. And that structure really took LA from one of the most infamous and poorly performing police departments in the country post Ramparts and Rodney King to being really an exemplar across the country. So again, I think rather than the knee-jerk reaction to some of the public safety challenges we are already seeing this summer, and we'll continue to see homicides are up, unfortunately, about 8% this year versus last year, resisting just adding another layer of bureaucracy for policing, instead consolidating and really pushing professional excellence in the police department.
And I think the public safety discourse, like you were saying, from my experience, is pretty strained in this town. Like, emergency management does a lot more than people realize. I don't care what your politics are, okay? And I just think that the emergency management and response types, even the law enforcement, could do a little bit better, maybe countering some of the incorrect information, but also like proactively giving the community like more of an idea of how it works for them.
Certainly. And this goes back to this, this idea, especially of community policing, is all about being proactive and not reactive. And in one of these reports, it shows there are some areas of the city, some police districts, there was one in particular on the west side, just 9% of police time was proactive, meaning 90+% of the time they are responding to calls in this heightened state of sort of an emergency response mode. And you're not going to get a high clearance rate. You're not going to be solving murders if you are just constantly, instead of building relationships and trust on, following calls to every which corner of the neighborhood. So, and to your point, there was a new infrastructure for mental health response
called CARE, right? CARE,
which was a huge initiative. It's sort of a version of that started under Mayor Lightfoot. Mayor Johnson ran a lot on increasing that mental health response, and there was just reporting in the Tribune that, I mean, the word used there, which is correct, was floundering.
Oh no!
And this is
failing the implementation.
Absolutely failing. And it started with hundreds of, maybe a peak of maybe 700 calls a year for that, where they were dispatched, and now it's down, and it's not even being publicly. The mayor's office took down the public dashboard showing how much it was being used because it was embarrassing. And I think there is a lot of support for emergency mental health response.
Yeah.
And
for sure, though,
and
even the emergency management professionals seem bought in on like delivering that type of service.
For sure, and it is common sense, and other cities have implemented it effectively. Denver has a particularly good model on this, and the failure of that was the result of exactly the dynamic we're talking about. There's way too many cooks in the kitchen in terms of who's responsible for the public safety response, and when you have that fragmentation, it's very hard to implement something new like this. And that's what we're seeing in Chicago.
Crazy. Okay. Amazing to talk to you.
Thanks, man. Thanks for coming.
We talked about everything. Almost. Hopefully we'll get back together maybe like around the end of the summer, early fall, and see what's changed and what is happening heading into February. Thank you so much,
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.